All right. Thank you for listening to watching another episode of the T.R.U.T.H Project podcast. Today we're doing a live Google Hangout with the Truth. Welcome, Truth.
What's up? Thank you.
So the Truth said he's gonna be moving around. So if you see his background changing, know he's moving. Welcome back to the G3 Project.
It's good to be back. This time I got an album out. We can talk freely.
I know. I'm excited. I've been listening to the album. I watched your interviews with Ravi, which I was super jealous. I've been trying to reach Ravi for like years.
What the Saints say? Favor ain't fair.
I know. When I meet him, I'm probably gonna act like people that saw Michael Jackson in the 80s. But
that's how I felt. I was in there crying.
Crying. That's what's up. So your new album is complicated. I hope everybody's already went and got that. It's a great album, great body of work. What inspired you to do the album? I know you talked a little bit about it last time you were on, but for those who didn't hear your last conversation with you through, what kind of inspired you to put an album out?
Yeah, it's complicated. It's something that God kind of branded on my heart about 4 years ago. I had no idea that it was going to evolve into what it is now. But I did know that I wanted to deal with some complexities and some tensions. So I think that the main thing that inspired the record is the climate that we're in. When I look at the climate, one of the things that I've always done as an artist is I've always looked to fill in the gaps. I haven't looked for it. It just happens. It's just kind of my wiring. So when everybody was doing crucifixion songs in Christian hip hop, God gave me the resurrection song. And that's when everybody was doing, I came from the streets, God delivered me. I did a song called My Story, where I talked about how I grew up really the polar opposite. I grew up in a church with parents that are both evangelists and pastor. So I didn't come from that type of background. So I found that my over the years, a lot of my material has been stuff that is really just kind of filling in the gaps, like what's not being said, but what conversation needs to be had. And so I think that with this album, the same is true. This is really the conversation I believe needs to be had. It needs to be had in the church and outside of the four walls of the church, and well, in the church invisible, and in the four walls of the church, and outside of the four walls of the church. We have to be having this conversation about these very complex issues, because I feel like we, to a large degree, have a natural tendency to oversimplify. I just think that, it's easier that way. It's easier to either oversimplify or to live in the extreme. Extremes are always easier. You look at church history, the pendulum has always swung from left to right, which is a large part of what I even talk about on the record in the song called Color Purple. We live in a very, especially in Western culture, a very either or context or society or world. Who wore, if two women wear the same dress, Star Magazine or USA Today will say who wore it best, as opposed to them just both looking nice. We want to know who wore it best. And hip hop, we want to argue about top five. In sports, we want to argue about LeBron James and Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, and which one of them is the greatest. Even just that concept of that suffix est, that concept of the greatest, is something that I think has more to, in our culture, we have to choose. You have to be, Democrat or Republican. That's just the world in which we live. And so I feel like historically in church history, the pendulum is swung in a similar fashion, very right to left, left to right, as opposed to finding the middle and living in that tension, because it's more difficult to live in the tension. Just the last thing I'm gonna say to that point, and then I'll let you talk. But should I let you talk now?
No, you're good.
Okay.
You're fine.
But when in church history, when you look at like when they were trying to figure out how to steer clear of being stained by the world, what was happening, people were going into monasteries, and literally some people were building houses in trees. I guess that's where we get the idea of tree houses from. But that was the effort to steer clear of being stained by the world. But look at the extreme, you follow me? So it's very easy to be extreme. And so with this album, I wanted to deal with the tension of wrestling in the middle, having a resolve, but still wrestling in the middle, and understanding everything is not so simple. And let's talk through the various complexities of life, faith, and religion.
That's very good, because you hit on one of the points that I wanted to bring up. Your song Color Purple. When I heard Color Purple, I tweeted you. I don't know if you remember, but I was like, that's kind of my story, because I was raised in a non-denominational type, kind of leaning charismatic, not too far out there. But I was always raised in a biblical balance. To me, my dad is an expository preacher, but he is also what we would say we have a charismatic belief. We believe, that the gifts are still in effect in this day. But then I went and studied. I got engrossed in Christian hip hop, and so I got engrossed in like Flames Rewind CD, and so I started studying. And then I took religious studies at a secular university, and that exposed me to a whole bunch of things. And then I went to Liberty, which is conservative Baptist. So I just I'm like a melting pot.
You're a mutt like me. Like me.
So it's easy for me, I think, to live in that tension because I've always had to. But when people are kind of saved and they only know Reformed theology, they have caricatures of those who are maybe charismatic. They have caricatures of Baptists because they've only known this one thing. And I think it's so important that your message that you shared in The Color Purple be heard, because so many people don't know how to interact with other Christians, let alone interact with people who aren't Christians.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
So how did that song, how has that journey been for The Color Purple?
You know what? I think I say it in the song, hasn't been an easy journey, because so much of what I struggle with and coming to embrace the middle and as much as I can, has been, the struggle has been the result of a not fitting socially. See, because I think that so often we think issues are theological when they're really not. They're really social. And a lot of what we hold dearly to, has not as much, has little to do with what God being pleased with, God being pleased with how we're processing and how we're thinking, and more to do with people being pleased with how we're processing and thinking. Much like Peter. Peter's problem was just that, right? He didn't want to be seen hanging around Gentiles when clearly God had shown him a vision from heaven that now there would be an inclusion of those who were considered to be unclean. You feel me? God has shown him a vision from heaven of all the unclean animals. He said, what I call clean, you don't call unclean. Went through that whole thing. Then following that, went to Cornelius's house. Cornelius and his family come to, you feel me? Like, Peter had all these rich experiences where he was very clear on the fact that God had now included that which was at one point considered unclean. Yet, in the moment in which the Bible says James and his guys started approaching Peter when he was sitting at the table with the Gentiles, he got up and pretended like he wasn't with them. And I feel like, but they were brothers. See, that's what we got to catch. You feel me? And so I feel like our issue is similar in that we struggle with pleasing the people that we admire. Number one, our favorite teachers. You feel me? Like, because I dare not contradict the Puritan writers, and I dare not contradict the Acts 29 movement, and I dare not contradict, you feel me? And I dare not contradict, you know, the all of the artists that I look up to. You feel me? So I think that a lot of it has to do with our desire to fit and our desire for people to like us than it has to do with our theology or even God being pleased with how we see these men and women of God, I would say. And so the struggle was always difficult for me because it was a social issue. It was, I don't want to be deemed as, you know, off. I don't want to be seen as heretical, you know, or embracing people that are heretical. I don't want to be seen liking the people that nobody else does. I don't want to be seen sitting at the table with my Gentile brothers. You feel me? Because the issue is Peter knew all the challenges that Jewish people still had with Gentiles, which is why he didn't want to stay at that table with them. And so I think that that was my struggle. So that was a hard journey for me, but it was very real. I saw, I evolved over time. You know, I used to criticize every song I heard on the radio, every Black song, you know, whether it was Pastor McClurkin or if it was Israel Houghton or if it was, you know, all the songs that were popular. If they were popular, they were wrong. If they were on TBN, it was off. You feel me? Before, you follow me? You feel me? I remember when Stand came out, when Donnie McClurkin's song Stand came out. And I remember listening to that song, finding ways to pick it apart. You know what I'm saying? Finding ways, righteous man falls 7 times. Yeah, but said that, I don't know. Just all kinds of stuff. Anytime they quoted the Old Testament, but that was for Israel. That's not for us. I was just overly critical of everybody. You follow me? Of any and everybody that didn't fit within the pale of teachers and writers that all my reformed friends had embraced. And so my evolution came, like I said, when I began to, number one, spend time with these brothers and see, man, like, these are really like godly men and godly women. You feel me? Like, I'm not saying that they dot all their I's or cross all their T's, but none of us do. And that's what I need us all to understand. The reform guys ain't dotting all their I's either. You're quote unquote charismatic, theologically charismatic teachers are not dotting all their I's, but the reform guys are not dotting all their I's either. We all getting it wrong. Paul says, yo, I see through a glass darkly. None of us are going, until the perfect comes, we're all going to see through a glass darkly. And so I think that as opposed to like having this, you know, so anyway, to finish my story. So, you know, when I started spending time with them, I started realizing these are men and women of God, and God didn't intend for all of us to have it right. What I found is that the more time we spent together, the more I gleaned from them, the more they gleaned from me. That's why I said that, you know, some of them taught me how to think. Some of them taught me how to praise. You walk up in these reform churches and think God is dead.
Yeah.
You feel me? Everybody's just so together. I'm like, come on, let's get a little ugly with it. Throw a little LeBron James final championship cry face. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Ugly face on it. Let's run around the church a little bit. That's all right. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If they want to cut the 2-step, let them go. They're celebrating God. Why not? You follow me? If they believe in the perpetuity of the gifts, none of us are solid on that. All those passages that many our reformed brothers and sisters use in order to I don't want to say slam, but just for lack of a better word, to slam the idea that the sign and revelatory gifts are still relevant in modern day. None of us are 100% on that. We still wrestling with what does it mean for the perfect to come, which is clear to me. But I'm just saying, you feel me? So my point is, So my point is, I got to a place where I realized, wait, there's so much value in them, and there's so much that I'm missing out on by keeping them at bay, by overly criticizing them. I'm losing out on so much as a result. They taught me love. Reform. My reformed world taught me how to think, taught me how to be critical, taught me how to be analytic, taught me hermeneutics, taught me there's a lot that, how to properly understand the scriptures, to read the verse in light of the chapter, and read the chapter in light of the book, and read the book in light of the Bible as a whole. All of that came as a result of being in that conservative world. But being around the more charismatic, their love for each other is just different. Is there? You feel me? That their love for each other is just different. Shoot, when I've watched my uncle, who was 50 pounds, I watched him. I literally watched God heal that man from cancer. I watched it with my own eye. He was 50, a grown man, 50 pounds. And he was done. Doctors cut him. It was a wrap. I literally watched God restore that man. He's been living now for 15 years.
Wow.
So can't nobody tell me about the healing power of God. So my point is, I love all of it. My whole point is, why can't we all just get along? I'm not saying we all have to agree on every point. You follow me? I'm not saying we don't have fundamental differences, but aren't we all brothers and sisters in Christ in this? And can't we draw closer to each other to try to work through it as opposed to criticizing each other from a distance? So that's my passion. That's my heart, man. And I know it's getting me in a little bit of trouble, but I don't care. Like, I do what I believe. I do what I believe honors God. So that's it.
And I love that line where you say you had to go apologize to Eric and Tina because you were too hard on them. Because I've experienced that in my own life. I know when I went through this cage countenance phase, when I got exposed to Reformed theology, I was going in on everybody. My friends telling them they were wrong, shading people that I grew up with. So I understand exactly. And I had to go and apologize because I was dead wrong. Because I was arrogant. Because I thought I had this knowledge and I need to teach you something.
Exactly.
But life has a way of humbling you. And you have to go back and apologize real quick for those things. So I appreciate that song because I understand it 100%. I understand it.
And listen, that's not to say we shouldn't be Bereans. That's not to say that we should not go back to see if what they're saying is true. Mm-hmm. That does not, none of that I'm not getting rid of any of that in what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. The tension is, can we live in a space where we say, you know what? I went back to the scriptures and saw that when Creflo said that, it was untrue. You follow me? While at the same time, over the past 3 years, I have been watching Creflo Dollar. I know that historically he's been known as a prosperity preacher, but I've been watching him very intently, very closely, not to like criticize him. I just started watching him because I saw that he was teaching on grace. I saw he was doing a series on grace that lasted years. And I started watching that and I was like, this dude is killing everything right now. Like, you feel me? Like, killing everything. I mean, all he talked about was grace, the righteousness of God in Christ, justification by faith through grace, grace by faith, not of work. Like, he spent a whole few years just on that subject. And I'm like, all I could say is, what are we going to say about that? Sorry, dogs are my area. That's why I got to be cautious. You got him? Baby, nah, it don't matter to me. She don't look like no baby. So all I'm saying is, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with, say, oh yeah, but 3 years ago he was teaching this. No, why can't we acknowledge what he's doing right and embrace that? You feel me? Throw whatever you think is wrong away and embrace what you know to be right. You feel me? That's how we grow, by living in those tensions. All right, so I'm done.
Yeah. And I think we have to acknowledge there's a little bit of, one of my mentors said, a little bit of heresy in everyone. If we go back and look at the evangelicals or reformers that had slaves, whose orthopraxy was all off, that would be heretical in one sense, but we would still embrace the truth that they did say, and throw out the things that were wrong that they said. So I get your point totally.
Am I breaking up at all? You're breaking up a little bit.
Just a little, but you're good now.
Okay, you were breaking up too. So
okay.
Just letting you know.
Okay. For copycat religions, that's one of the things we've been dealing with here at the T.R.U.T.H Project. How did you navigate through that? I know you talked to Dr. Zacharias about it, but can you share a little bit with us about how you navigated through that? I know that was a hard space for you in your undergrad time.
Yeah, just researching, really. Just researching, digging. It was difficult for me at first. That was really not as difficult as when I first was exposed to it in Western civilization, because I wasn't exposed to the Horus and Osiris thing until later. I struggled with the deluge stories, and I had the stories of Noah's Ark, or that were stories that were similar to Noah's Ark. Before Noah's Ark was documented, I struggled with Pandora's Box story, similar to that of Adam and Eve's, before the story of Adam and Eve was documented. I think that's when I was like, okay, we might be in trouble. That's when I had those were the stories that impacted me the most in my Western civilization class. And I think that's what you're asking me, how I worked through that. Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. Well, the first thing I'll say is that I undergird every time I went through a very difficult, because I went through there were 4 pivotal points in my life, all of which were characterized by doubt, or really wrestling with the things that I had been holding, that I held tightly fundamentally. And so that was one of the times. And that particular time, I think that I'm sorry, in each of those times, the thing that was consistent was prayer. Even when I doubted the very existence of God, because I did that as well, even as the truth. So I was a couple albums in and went through a few weeks wrestling with the existence of God. Now, the Bible does say a man who doubts is like a ship that's tossed to and fro. So I don't carry that as a badge, but it is a reality for many of us that we go through those seasons of doubt, and those crucibles of doubt. And so each one of those seasons, like I said, even when I doubted the existence of God, was still undergirded by prayer, as weird as that may be. Because how do you pray to God and you doubt his existence? But I was praying. And so I always start there. For anybody who's watching or listening, I will always say to make sure that you're going through that time, because you may not be able to read your Bible. I wasn't. You feel me? Because I didn't know what to believe at certain points. You feel me? You may not be able to read your Bible, but you could. God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek after him. And so each of those seasons were all undergirded with prayer. So I'll start there. And then in that particular instance, with the Western civilization class and the copycat religion stuff, really was just a matter of doing the research to kind of, see what was going on there. Why are these stories predating, the biblical historical accounts by hundreds of years, if not more? You feel me? And so for me, I started doing the research, and the one thing that made a lot of sense to me was the fact that everything was transmitted orally, which is beautiful. You feel me? Like I had already known that. I just didn't put all the pieces together because it wasn't easy to write, for one. and because people used so much more. Did I take you off? Oh, okay, sorry.
I lost your picture, your video connection. I can't see you anymore. Hello?
Uh, Hold on. Back? Am I back?
No. Right. Yeah, you're back now.
I'm back.
Okay.
Yeah. So the way I worked through it was coming to an understanding that everything was orally transmitted at that time, and so it really is not a matter of who wrote it first. You know, you play the whisper game. The whisper game, you could stand 15 people in a row, and we all just whisper this one thing to each. We have one person whispers one thing, and by the time it gets to the 15th person, it can become another thing. It oftentimes does, right? When stuff is just passed down. And so what I found is that the issue was not that it wasn't who wrote it first that was the issue. It's who wrote it accurately. um, because you got to think everybody's hearing these same stories. Everybody knows about the story of Noah's Ark before it's written, because everything was orally transmitted. Every kid is hearing the story. Every kid is hearing the story of Adam and Eve. Every kid is hearing the story of the Tower of Babel, because mythology has their version of that as well. They have a version of all those narratives. But the question is really who wrote it accurately, not who wrote it first. And so I came to a place. My resolve was that the guys that the writers of the scriptures were the guys who wrote it accurately, and I think that's kind of where I landed, and that's been real huge for me.
Yeah, and I think being honest with doubting is so important. I remember my second year of seminary and really wrestling through some things as I was reading the existence of God being one, because of the problem of evil. And I remember going to my professor's office, and I was like kind of distraught, and I was like, man, I don't know where I'm at, with this stuff. As I'm reading through the classes, and I'm in seminary, and I'm leading the ministry. He looked at me, and this is my New Testament professor, Dr. Purser. I'll never forget it. He said, "Sometimes I wrestle too. It's okay." And that was the most freeing thing for me, because here he is. He's devoted his whole life to studying the New Testament, and he could say, "Sometimes I struggle with it too." And for me, that gave me the hope I needed to keep going.
Yeah.
Just to know somebody else wrestles with these things too. And I think what you're doing through your music is giving people hope, because sometimes if you're wrestling in the dark, you feel like, oh, I'm stupid for thinking this. Nobody thinks this. And then when somebody else says it, it's like, oh, you think that way too? And then we all like, yeah. So then you get comfort, and then you're able to come out of it because you have that, somebody else struggle with it. So that kind of gives you hope.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's when we talk about the inspiration for the album, that's really what the inspiration is to, number one, bring people along with me on my journey as part of what the benefit of being an artist provides us, of bringing people along, just walking them where people kind of feel like they are part of your life, part of your world. Number two, as an artist, one of the benefits that we have is we get to articulate what people are thinking but won't say out loud, or don't know to say. Sometimes you hear a song, you be like, that's exactly what I feel, or that's exactly how I felt. I just didn't know how to put it in words. And so the beauty of being an artist is we get to articulate just all the twists and turns of people's souls, and what's going on in people's hearts. And then the third reason why I wanted to do this album was to create a safe, for the church to begin to think about how we can create a safe place for people, for Christians, pastors, leaders, even, to be honest about their issues with doubt. Because I don't know if the church is a safe place for that conversation. I don't know. I'm not saying it's not. I would venture to say that it's more not than it is. And I think we can do a better job, especially with our youth groups, and cultivating environments where they don't just feel safe to come in and talk about, their broken families, because I think we spend so much time pandering, sometimes pandering, I know that can sound negative, but sometimes pandering or giving attention to, that's not negative, the kind of emotional condition and state of young people, that we never get to this stuff. We never get to these hard questions, and by the time they get to college and now they're introduced by professor such and such that they look up to, to all of these alternative perspectives and these anti-Christian ideas, evolution, and they do a great job because they've spent their lives researching literature of all sorts, and they've been for many years thinking through how to uproot and undermine all things Christian. And so with, coming from a youth group where you haven't dealt with these issues at all, going into an environment that is hostile towards you, and not just the professor, but even your peers in a very post-Christian world are challenging you on stuff that you always held tightly to, but you never walked through or work through how to be thoroughly equipped enough to contend for your faith in these areas, before you know it, you've defected. Or you're weak and you're broken. You don't know what to believe, and you go through all that. Happens when you do know. So how much more if you don't have, your faith hasn't been informed in these areas. And so I forgot how I got into all of that. Oh, I'm just going back to your point that I think that I wanted to open up the conversation, and even for leaders, because why is it that leaders defect from the faith? And I'm not saying that this is the only reason why. Sometimes it's moral issues, but I'm just saying that I do find that this is becoming increasingly more of an issue. As you look at some of the leaders, people that we all look up to, defecting from the faith, not believing anymore, or completely doing a 180, doing a Rob Bell, just completely, shifting their theological perspectives and moving towards heresy. So I think that if we have the conversation more and create healthy environments for healthy dialogue, I think we'll be much better off, and even provide answers to some of these tough questions and musings. I think we'll be better off, and especially in this millennial world and post-Christian world.
Yeah, I agree, because I spent during my time in Lynchburg while I was at Liberty, I used to spend my weekends in DC, and I would always go to brunch with my friends, and they would invite friends that were unchurched or used to go to church and don't have any dealings with the church. And one of the things I'm noticing with young professionals, especially in the city, is that they want critical thinking from church. They want to have that conversation, and they feel like, well, I'm educated, I have a good job, I want to go to church, and I don't want to leave my brain at the door. I want to think through what you're saying. And sometimes, when people come to church, the messages don't. In some areas you go to, they won't make logical sense, And so when we have some, and people feel like, well, that was a waste of my time because that doesn't make sense. And so then you have.
Let me give you an example. I was at a mega church, 8,000 seater. I won't say where, because I think it's like the only one in that particular state or city. But I was at that church and I was doing my sound check, and the guy who was doing my monitors came over to me, and I had the Reason for God by Tim Keller sitting on the drum riser, and we he asked me about the book. We began to talk about it, and when he was like, "Man, I would love to read something like that," And he said, I just had to be honest with you. I love my pastor. He's amazing. He said, every week that I leave this church, I feel inspired. He said, but I'm intellectually starved. And I think that he is kind of a microscopic example of what many millennials, critical thinkers, are having issue with. That church, especially Black church, is very inspiring. It's just not intellectually stimulating. And the Bible says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And so it's important that we be very intentional about, again, living in the tension of doing both and. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I think that's phenomenal, because we're living in a culture that it's funny because we like to think critically, but then we don't critically think through some of the things that we consume every day. The music we listen to, we have this whole idea of my truth and tolerance, which is problematic. I think you deal with that a little bit in your album, because I think this whole idea of people being against absolute truth is pervasive in our culture. This whole concept of my truth. I was just listening to Beyonce's new CD, and on the song "Sorry," in the second verse, she says, she's talking about the lies that I guess Jay-Z or whoever she's talking about. And then she says, in the third verse, I pray you reveal what his truth is. And I'm thinking, if there's his truth, then there can't be an absolute lie. Because my truth and absolute lies can't coexist in the same space. But we'll take that and we'll say, well, we'll be quick to say, oh, that's a lie. But you could say, if you've taken on this idea of my truth, well, couldn't that just be their truth? Can't, the world can't exist like that for very long. And I think Dr. Zachariah said that when you're talking with him, if everybody kind of just does what they want to do and, live by their own rules, society can't function. And I don't think we critically think through that, but then we call ourselves critical thinkers. And so it's so funny because that verse in Romans has been coming up in my mind, proclaiming to be wise, they became fools.
Wow.
And I think that's something that our culture is kind of the trajectory we're headed towards.
No, you're spot on. You're spot on. And that is exactly where we are. But like you said, nobody can live that way. Nobody can live that way. We can, because, I was just reading the other day. Do you know Amy? She's amazing. She's from Europe.
With RZIM?
Yeah. Yeah, she's pretty amazing. And she was just talking about how you can't, for anybody who believes that all things are just a matter of interpretation or our truth, our individual truth. She said it begs another question, which is a question of ultimate meaning in language and words. So the question really becomes, do words have ultimate meaning? Because if all things are just a matter of interpretation or, based on a subjective, based on cultural, socio-cultural context or whatever, then now we have a bigger question, which is that, or basically a bigger conclusion, which is that words have no inherent meaning. They just, whatever they mean to you is what they mean. And then if you take basically the next step, which is, if it's all a matter of, if there is no ultimate meaning, which is essentially what you're saying, should I just take what you're saying to mean that there is ultimate meaning? because if words have no meaning and you just said there's no ultimate meaning in words, I guess I could just take that to mean words have ultimate meaning. Because it's all a matter of how I interpret it, not what it actually is. And like you said, nobody can live in that world. I mean, on any level. You feel me? Like we can't, when you get on an airplane, it'll tell you don't tamper with the smoke, no smoking. I was thinking about that the other day when I was on a plane. There's no smoking prohibited. So is that just, now everybody knows what that sign means. The cigarette with the smoke, the little swiggle of smoke, the circle and the line through it, right? But if it's all a matter of interpretation, why not just light up on the plane? You follow me? What Robbie says oftentimes is he says, man, rules seem to die the death of a million qualifications. And that's the world that you end up living in when you don't claim to hold on to anything absolute or ultimate or inherent. So you're spot on. But I think that, like you said, nobody can survive with that mindset. And most of anybody who has that perspective refuses to, whether they know that they're doing it or not, submit to that line of thinking. They won't submit themselves to that thinking. So I'm sorry, my battery's about to die. That's why I was going out.
Okay. Well, I know we're almost out of time. What would you like to leave with our listeners, our watchers today?
Yeah. You know, it's really not just about filling your head with information. You know, the purpose of informing your faith is so that, number one, you can, before you get to defending or contending for the faith, it is first intended to it is first intended to help you to have a more intimate relationship with God, or a deeper connection with God. A deeper understanding leads to a deeper connection with God, which ultimately the vine is in the branches, and the branches are in the vine, and I am in him, and he is in me, and you are in him, and he is in you, and you just want to continue to cultivate that relationship. And so as we study to show ourselves approved, and we do the research, part of why my sister and I, when we, first felt like we had answers and responses for all of our charismatic friends. A lot of that was just because we were just zealous with our information. We had a lot of information, and we were zealous in light of the information. But it has to be there has to be an integration of both information and intimacy, and really information that lends itself to intimacy. And so that's what I want to leave you with. Please allow the information, all the books that you read, from all the great men who have written both on the conservative side and on the charismatic side, allow for that to sink in, and allow for your roots to be established and run deep in the faith, so that, or to the end that, your relationship with God is richer and deeper. And then out of that will come a richness and dialogue. And so that's what I would want to leave with people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, T.R.U.T.H. Make sure you go get his new album. It's Complicated. It's on iTunes, Google Play, and wherever music is sold, correct?
You got it.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate you, Lisa.